The grid down scenario is like if there's a power outage, or a lot worse if the whole grid is down and there's no water, no power. This is usually caused by something else, either like a war or a severe weather event, which we'll be talking about next. But could be just an economic problem too, of no money. So there are severe weather events, and things like storms, earthquakes, wildfires, Arctic blasts. That's where it's really, really cold. And a lot of other severe weather events. We just had tornadoes come through our area a couple days ago. A couple people got trees on their cars. So yeah, that often affects a small number of people really badly, but sometimes it affects a lot of people. And then housing market unaffordability. I think that's a form of economic collapse too. Okay, let's talk about recessions. Deep dive into how to prepare, how to survive a recession. The first thing is you don't want to go deeper into debt during the recession. Oftentimes your income is not quite enough, and so it feels like that's a solution, but a recession can easily turn into a depression, and then your debt is a really big problem. So during a recession, you want to avoid increasing in debt, and you may have to get like multiple jobs, just because it's usually a short-term period where the whole economic system is just a little harder to make ends meet. It's usually not very long, although we had the Great Recession back in like 2008, that was pretty long. But normally they're only a few months of whatever problem you got. So basically for a recession, you just make more money and all the other problems go away. In stage 3 hyperinflation, essentials become astronomically expensive, and the cost of everything can double often in one day, definitely in 1 year. I think that's basically the definition, is prices doubling at least every year. What happens is people get to where they don't trust the currency at all. This is extreme levels of interest rate manipulation by the government, and they just print. And then you have you don't trust the money, so if you get paid, you go buy your groceries or whatever right away, because tomorrow they'll cost more and you can't hardly afford any with your payment. It's an absolutely amazing time to have a garden or fields, farm production, or anything production where you sell and meet somebody else's need. And that would be beneficial in almost any circumstance, but specifically in hyperinflation, if you're meeting other people's needs, so they're compensating you in today's prices for whatever it is, whether it's food or other resources, that's where you really succeed and thrive. The next one is depression. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the hyperinflation. In 1923 in Germany, they had hyperinflation stage 3, and people would be moving around wheelbarrow loads of money just to pay for small amounts of things, like a loaf of bread or something like that. And so that was kind of what was going on. Anyway, to the depressions, like the Great Depression, this is almost the exact opposite of hyperinflation. This is deflation. Prices are going down. If you have money in the bank and the bank doesn't collapse, which often happens during a depression, but if you have money in the bank and you can access it, you're going to be doing really well. If you have debt in a depression, you're probably not going to be able to pay it off because your income's going to be down. I want to tie depression into the mental health situation they call depression. I think that people can go through where you feel depressed and you don't have motivation to accomplish anything. And so whatever problems you have because of the outside economic conditions, they hit you harder than they should, and so you actually go from being struggling financially because of the financial system to actually just depressed, and you can't hardly work, and you need to work. And so mental health is a really big issue, in my opinion, for a depression. But this is when we had like hobos roaming the country, and definitely another time you want to have a garden when your food systems are not working well, or your economic system is not working well, and so people often are struggling. There's often like long lines for new jobs, and the companies can hardly afford to pay anybody to fill the roles they have. Even though they may need the help, they can't afford to pay you. So it just kind of becomes worse and worse. Number 4 is overtaxation. This is where the government comes in and takes way too much of your productivity, and you struggle because of that. And this can be often, it's a part of other problems too, but hyperinflation and inflation is actually a type of taxation where where the government prints more money, and so the printing of money devalues the currency you have, and so that's an invisible tax, but then prices increase over time. So what do you do about that? That's the one where you might move. I mean, if you really think that's where you're at. I mean, here in America, we have several states that are taxing a state income tax of quite high. I think I've seen 13%. If you add that onto your federal tax, it starts to look very much like, how can people survive? But obviously that's a decision you have to make, but if it's like the marauding bands of Confederate and Union soldiers from World War II, going through the Shenandoah Valley, taking all the food and a lot of the livestock, and then what you actually do is hide it. But not hiding stuff from taxation is not always possible. Okay, the next one I'm going to talk about is stagflation. This is where your costs go up a lot faster than income, and usually this happens for most of the people in the country simultaneously. And so it's inflation, but it's normal inflation. Your income should go up with your costs, and so your buying power would stay almost the same. But in stagflation, the economy stays stagnant, and your income rarely goes up much, but costs keep rising. We had this in America back during the Iraq and Afghanistan war, as the costs of that war were causing us to, our fuel cost was going way up, and a lot of other costs that were tied to that were rising, like food, but people's incomes were not generally rising nearly as fast. So I actually think this is the big problem with the housing market, which we'll get to at the end. I think that's number 16. But yeah. So some people, when they're going through stagflation, could get extra jobs, but most likely what you're going to want to do is just use your resources more wisely and focus on getting your needs met and not a lot of the wants and all of that. So basically tighten your belt and live frugally, which is really what you need to do for hyperinflation. Not hyperinflation, for depression. Hyperinflation, you almost buy stuff just because you want to have something that somebody will buy for more tomorrow. But stagflation, you really just want to control your costs as much as you can so your income works. Part 6 is war. When you have a war and you're involved, whether it's in your country or just affecting your country, There's a lot of effects. So you're probably going to want to hide assets, bury your any gold or silver you have where you can find it, but people going by you can't steal it from you as easily. You want to flee if you're in a place where you're being overtaxed or under threat of violence or bloodshed, especially if there's live munitions flying around you. It's often best to just get out of there, go somewhere where the fight is not, if that's possible. Yeah. One thing about war is you're probably going to have either inflation or depression, recession, something like that, simultaneously as your economic conditions just generally deteriorate. Money doesn't do what it's supposed to do. People don't do what they're supposed to do around you, and so everything's just unsafe and unsavory. So, yeah. Okay, number 7 is population and demographic collapse. So a lot of Western nations have been having their birth rate go down. When it gets below 2.1 as a country, then your resources just become a lot more of a problem. The first couple years of a demographic collapse actually feels like a super good time because everybody has more to spend per child and everything just feels great. But as you get further down it, then you have less workers taking care of things, less housing being built. Generally creates like a housing crisis where you can't afford the young people can't afford housing. The old people have big houses that need maintenance and they can't afford the maintenance. So if you're in that where you're an old person with a house that needs maintenance, you might consider letting a young family live with you for where part of the rent is maintenance costs, and they use a couple rooms out of your house. Or if you're a young person, maybe you do the opposite of that if you can't, basically house hacking. But long term, the solution is really to have more children so you personally are not going through a demographic collapse. I mean, they say America's going through a demographic collapse, but my parents had 13 children, so they're not going to feel the effects nearly as bad as somebody who only had 1 or 0 children. In stage 2 hyperinflation, that's where you have prices going up between 10% a year and 100% a year, probably. And so you do buy assets if you think milk churns are what people are going to need in a year. You buy them now because you know they're going to be worth more in a year, and their value will go up faster than if you keep any of your assets in money, cash. Then your value goes down. Often you want to do income-producing assets still here. It's still like for the hyperinflation stage 3. A garden will still be nice, but not necessarily necessary. You still probably have a job. You may have stagflation where the job doesn't go up but pay as fast as it costs. So often a side gig that helps you make money in today's dollars rather than in the pay scale of when you got hired is a good way to survive a lot of the inflation problems, but especially stage 2, having like a main job and a side gig that you do. I also want to talk about gold and silver because in most of your inflations, but especially stage 2, buying gold or silver and holding it till when you need the resource is a really good way to maintain your value. And so gold and silver are a particularly good investment for any inflation, but especially stage 2. Our collapse scenario number 9 is gang warfare. This is like where different competing gangs control parts of your city and they fight and have shootouts and innocent people are caught in a crossfire, and sometimes you have to pay for protection. If this is really what's going on, you may really seriously want to consider trying to escape from your area. And sell your house and move to somewhere where the gang warfare does not exist. If you have to stay there, you want to look shabby and uninteresting and just blend in with the surroundings and hope that people don't bother you much. Yeah. Definitely a situation where you may want weapons to defend yourself, because they're probably more likely to break in and try to steal stuff from you. There's probably higher crime, more need for defense from, like, rapes and assaults. So, definitely if you feel stuck in a gang warfare environment, consider buying a weapon to defend yourself. So, collapse scenario 10 is interest rate manipulation. Often the government will be saying that their interest rate manipulation is to improve the economy and not to cause a collapse, but often it feels very harmful to people who are caught in the crosshairs. If you're looking to buy a house and interest rates go up, it feels like right now here in America, it feels like a house you could have bought a year ago and paid $2,000 a month as your house payment. Today, because the interest rates are higher, a couple years ago maybe, and the house has gone up a little bit in value, so now it might be $3,000 for the same house, giving you the same value, but just a couple years of and a higher interest rate. And then when it goes down, that tends to cause all sorts of problems too, because then people are tempted to do borrowing at a lower interest rate, and they often make less sound financial decisions with low interest rates. Higher interest rates definitely help you make better decisions when you're saving and investing, but they also make it really hard if you're trying to buy anything. Definitely, as we talk about all of these different problems and the ones that are still coming, I avoid all sorts of debts except for probably a mortgage on your house. A lot of people feel they need that, and definitely that's one of the less problematic. The next type of collapse I want to talk about is a famine. That's where very low food production happens, usually because of drought, sometimes because of war or some of these other problems. If there's a depression, people may not feel like they have the resources to plant seed in the ground. And anyway, once you have a famine, then food is very unavailable, often costs more of your total budget, and another reason to have a garden is so you're less dependent on outside sources of food. The other way to be really prepared for a famine is to have a pantry stuffed full of food. And then if there's a limited supply, then you just eat whatever you've got in the storage and then go back and grow some and stretch it out as long as you can. If you find a good deal on something, you buy more of it and just get through that way. The next collapse I'm going to talk about is a spiritual collapse. And this is where we spend less time reading the scriptures and more time doing other things focused on ourselves. And it creates a lot of problems where people tend to have less morality, crime goes up, and a lot of times your debt level increases, and then your future is messed up. A great place to start is reading in Proverbs. Section 13 is how to prepare during good times. One of the big problems people do when it's good times and you're not struggling with either depression, hyperinflation, or any of these other problems is we often go deeper into debt. And that's actually really problematic because it means you're weighed down, you're tied down to problems that when you come through and you're going through stagflation, suddenly you can't afford the debt payment, or if it's depression, you lose your job entirely, and then you have to lose your house because you went into deep debt for your house. So definitely just avoiding debt. You still want to grow a garden so you're prepared for famine or hyperinflation. You may want to stockpile some silver, gold, and especially a little bit of food in your pantry. These are normal things. Starting a business that will meet your needs when normal income gets difficult is another way to prepare during good times. Okay, the next type of collapse I'm going to talk about is grid down scenarios. These can be like a snowstorm putting out your power, or where you can't afford your utilities so they get cut off, or where the whole system shuts down because of a war strike on your power system, or a lot of other problems, but suddenly your utilities that you're expecting, they stop working, and you've got to live without electric, hopefully just for a few days or a few weeks, or other grid-provided resources like water, or if you got gas for heat, maybe that goes down. So having a plan in place how you survive without electricity. One thing people think about is eating up the food in their fridge real fast, canning it maybe even. Food in the freezer needs to be canned or it's going to spoil. Then you need to have a plan to actually cook food when the power is out. A lot of us have electric based for most of our cooking, and so if your grid is down, you may not be able to do that. You may have to go cook on a fire outside in your yard, over a wood fire. It's always a possibility. Water sourcing. Do you have a stream you can get water from to flush your toilets? Do you have a filter that you can take whatever the cleanest water you can find is and filter it to drinkable quality? I recommend the Berkey filters for that. And if you have a different one, you probably have to boil your water too during a water problems with your water grid. How do you heat your home if the grid stops working? Or do you know how to survive in your home without heat? That'll be like extra blankets on the bed, wear extra layers if it's cold. If you're in air conditioning and the heat of summer comes and you don't have power, that's really tough too. But then you probably don't even have power to run fans. And so going and sitting in the basement when you're too hot, might be the solution for that. Or sitting outside in the shade. Okay, the next collapse type scenario I'm going to talk about is severe weather events. This would be like storms, earthquakes, forest fires, Arctic blasts of frozen air coming down from the Arctic or Antarctic if you're in the southern hemisphere. And then you get really cold for a time period. Anyway, so a lot of times the storms will mess up your grid and knock out your power. An earthquake is going to basically demolish all of your infrastructure, depending on how bad it is. You may have to move out of the area for a time if you have an earthquake. Forest fires, you may have to evacuate or build like a fire protection ring around your property. Arctic blasts, just insulate your house as well as you can. Investing in insulation is going to pay off pretty soon if you have any type of heating or cooling system anyway. So, yeah. But a lot of these, you just have to be resilient, have some tools, and be prepared to expect the unexpected, because a lot of these are rapidly deteriorating conditions and stuff like that. The last section I'm going to talk about is housing market unaffordability. If you're still with me, please hit the subscribe button and the like button. It really helps us accomplish what we need to do with this channel, and it helps us get closer to monetization and getting paid for our work here on YouTube. Anyway, so this is generally what I would classify as stagflation, which is basically the costs are rising faster than your income. And so this is going on right now in America. It feels like the cost is just rising astronomically on housing. Well, people's incomes are lagging behind, so it's a higher and higher percentage of your income goes to housing. And if you have a low-paying job, you may not be able to afford housing at all. So the first thing I would think about is housing hacks, and like staying with a family that maybe owns a house but needs somebody who does maintenance, and you do maintenance to cover part of your rent. The other thing is just save eventually. Then you should be able to find, and the type of house people who are new first-time home buyers, what I recommend is vastly different than what the market recommends. I recommend trying to find a fixer-upper that's really cheap. A couple weeks ago, I went and looked at a house that was $20,000. The median home price in the United States is $400,000. Now that house has some issues that would take a skilled repair person to do, but I've been seeing a lot of houses in different places across the U.S. that are in really affordable price points, and they could be cheaper than a down payment on a traditional expensive house. And then you fix it up and build your equity through sweat equity. Also consider like campers or tiny homes, depending on your exact circumstances. Some people, these are going to be the solutions that give you the best flexibility. If you have a tiny home, maybe you can build it and then sell it eventually and use the money for a down payment on your next house. Anyway, thank you for watching, and please tell me in the comments what I missed, what I should have talked about more, and we'll see you in the next video.